did tours, I suggested to people that they see more than one school. They can get recommendations from friends, family members, whatever, which is nice. But you almost need to experience more than one school in order to compare. So I think that that's a really good thing to remember.
And I think sometimes you just have a kind of gut response.
Right, exactly.
I've heard anecdotally from a lot of parents that when they went into a particular school, they just knew, it just felt right.
Right, right.
And you're not going to know that unless you go to
Exactly.
a number of schools.
And there are certain people who are looking, have certain criteria. And they can be as mundane as tuition, cost.
Yeah, I mean,
cost.
there are many things you have to consider. Hours, what
Right.
hours you need.
Right.
And then there are questions that you can ask of each of the schools, like, do you require that my child be potty trained? Because a lot of schools do.
Right.
What's the teacher to child ratio? That's a really important one.
One that I got very often was, how do you deal with conflict? What's your approach to that?
Certainly, if you have a neurodivergent child,
Yes,
you need to ask them
for sure.
what's their approach. Can they
yeah.
accommodate
Yeah.
children with special needs?
If you have a neurodivergent child, I think it's almost beneficial to have a conversation either before, maybe even after, so that you can share with them the specific issues that might be unique to your child.
I found that sometimes people were almost hesitant to bring it up
Yeah.
on a tour.
Yeah.
And I think that it's so important to bring it up as early as possible because based on how they react, you know whether this is an appropriate place for your kid.
I also had people who come who had the expectation that all schools had care starting at 7 a.m. and ending at 6 at night, and that's not the case. Our school was 9 to 3. Maybe we had an early drop off, but no longer. And there are some schools that are half day. There's some schools that require children to come every day. So that's something else you might want to make note of. We allowed our kids to come less than every day. And
some kids came twice a week.
Yeah, exactly. But there are some schools that require 5 days a week,
especially for older kids.
Yeah. And you had talked about people feeling a need for a specific approach or philosophy, and you have to think about that before. Though what I think is really important is you can't assume that all schools that call themselves Montessori are exactly the same, because they're not. And they can be very different, or Reggio. And you can have schools, there's an overlap. You can have schools of different philosophies that feel similar, but every school probably has their own personality. Sometimes it's, written in their philosophic statement. So you really should go on their website and read it, though many of them are pretty much the same.
Schools describe themselves as developmental, as
play-based, exactly.
Child-directed.
Yeah, or at least the schools that we're aware of.
Yeah, well, there are other schools that I think take a more traditionally academic bent.
Yeah.
And that would be reflected in their mission statement, their philosophy as well.
One of the other differences, I think, between schools is there are some schools that are multi-age, meaning that they combine kids of various ages together.
Traditionally, that's what Montessori does. Montessori has multi-age groupings.
Where a lot of schools that we're aware of, and we were one of them, that have separate groups for separate ages. Yeah. And there's a pro and con of both. We felt like we had...
I think I had actually sort of had a hybrid of that.
Yeah, exactly.
For kids who stayed till 3.
That's right. We combined all of our kids who stayed late together, so they had an opportunity to mix ages, but their home class was divided generally within a year. Could be a little less, but mostly a year.
Montessori is very child-directed, very hands-on. There's a big emphasis on acquiring life skills. As I said, they're multi-age groups. A large part of the teacher's job is setting up the environment.
The environment is one facet, one part.
Yes,
of
and in fact, the teacher's role is to remain as unobtrusive as possible.
Yeah.
That's very different than something like Reggio, which is very experiential, but teachers are very, very hands-on, and teachers are very, very hands-on.
Yeah.
There's talk about the adult being equal parts a teacher and a learner.
Right.
And a lot of their role is to watch and listen, and they have a very emergent curriculum.
An emergent curriculum is?
Emergent curriculum is when you base the curriculum on what the particular group of children are interested in, what has been brought up in the class, and Reggio is also very project-based, so they design their projects around what the kids have expressed interest in or are brought up organically in the classroom.
One of the things that I wanted to say about Montessori is Montessori petitioned them to allow them to have even less teachers.
Yeah, which corresponds to their philosophy of the role of the teacher, which I think is appropriate for a certain type of child. If you have a child who is going to need any extra support, I'm not sure that would be the best place for them.
Yeah, but even for a child who's very independent and might be able to, do well, it worries me that there isn't. I mean, it's kind of antithetical to what we believed in, that the role of teacher is paramount to a kid's experience at school. So,
although I think that we agree with and respect the idea that children are motivated learners, and that it's
I agree.
And that if you give them space to learn and discover on their own and to make their own choices, they can get pretty far.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you on that. And not only that, Montessori actually promotes certain kind of learning materials, very hands-on, experiential learning materials, much of what we use. Yeah. Some of them are really very, very good. So I think that there are really good aspects. And as I said before, Montessori schools differ, even though, the Montessori Association was asking for a higher ratio. There are probably schools out there with a much better ratio, and there are probably schools out there where the teachers are more involved. So that might be a question.
It's true of all of the philosophies that we've talked about and are going to talk about.
Right.
There are some that, subscribe to the ideology by the letter and are very, very, it's very important to them that they remain true to that particular philosophy. And there are other schools that where the philosophies serve more as an inspiration. High Scope, which is also child directed to a certain extent, although I think there's an emphasis on the child adult relationship, and with adults meeting kids where they are developmentally and helping build them to the next level. And there's a lot of talk about consistent routine. There are lots of routines that daily routines that are enacted or performed, and there's a lot of assessment a lot of assessment and documentation. More traditional academic schools where the emphasis is really on the acquisition of certain early cognitive skills like numeracy and phonics, which isn't to say that the more progressive philosophies don't integrate that also, because many of them do. But I would say that's not the primary emphasis.
Yeah. What about rye?
Rye is more, it's for young children.
Right.
It's probably 1 to 3, 0 to 3. The role of the adult is really to not interfere very much. You know, if you set up an environment where if your child falls down, they're not going to hurt themselves that badly, but then you're not there to catch them if they fall, you know, both literally and figuratively. Like you let children struggle and fail and work through it.
Yeah, and children with conflict. But children between the age of 1 and 3 have different kind of conflicts than older kids do.
Yes, and I personally have a bit of an issue with being standoffish with that, because then you allow the stronger kids to dominate the quieter ones. And sometimes I think that they need intervention and facilitation.
We also use terms that aren't exact. They're more approaches than philosophies, like child-centered, experiential, play-based, center-based.
Yeah.
Center-based is that there are a number of centers in each classroom. With art, I'm assuming that most schools that are center-based allow kids to move around. And so in our classroom, we had, you know, a table where we had Play-Doh, we had an art table, we had an area where we would do puzzles, an area where we did dramatic play, kitchen and dress up, blocks and cars and that kind of stuff. Teachers kind of move with the children among the different areas. Now, there might be schools that are a bit more structured where everybody does the same activity at the same time. And so that might be a question that a parent would want to know, how much structure is asked of the kids. I know that there are parents, especially if parents have a child at an age where they're dealing with oppositional behavior at home, which is pretty typical at age 2 and 3, and they think that a child needs more structure because they're not listening to them. And I'm not sure that as an educator, I agree with that. I think that
it depends. Sometimes they might, but sometimes that might mean they need even less structure.
Exactly.
This is a child who really wants to feel a sense of control and that they get to make choices.
Yeah. I think structure versus less structure is a question that parents might want to know about when they go on a tour. You know, you can have a school that allows children to be very self-directed, but still integrate some kind of group time so that they have an exposure.
We tried very hard to have a balance between those two things.
Yeah,
between
exactly.
Giving kids opportunities to make lots of choices for themselves, while also having there be times that they were required to do certain things, and that their wants and needs were not paramount. That the group sort of was the group, and the group's needs was more important in the moment.
Yeah.
I mean, I think experiential is about children exploring the world using all of their senses, and learning by touching and seeing and hearing and tasting sometimes.
It's kind of a hands-on approach.
It's definitely a hands-on approach.
And really goes with play-based. Though,
or learning by doing.
yeah, exactly. And, if you are aware of children's needs for having experiential activities, you might set up activities that are specifically geared to that, such as having a sand and water table that you trade off the kinds of media or things that you put in
You
it.
put at the
So,
table, yeah.
yeah.
Sometimes beans, sometimes rice, sometimes
Exactly,
sequins.
exactly. Having finger painting with either paints, or we sometimes did it with
Shaving cream.
shaving cream. It allows all kids to use their tactile senses, but especially there are kids who really, really are uncomfortable with getting themselves.
Tactilely defensive.
That's right, getting themselves dirty or touching
We
things.
would always have kids who were hesitant to even go in the sandbox. They didn't want to
Exactly.
touch the sand.
And so, very slowly, you want to introduce new experiences for them. Child centered is where the child is at the center of the discovery, that there are many options that they can participate in. And I contrast it with teacher centered.
Yes.
A teacher centered environment is where.
This is what we're all doing.
That's
right.
right. Exactly. We're all doing puzzles at the same time. We're all doing an art project.
Whereas child-centered, the child is, the teacher sets up the environment in a particular way, which is going to influence how the child explores their world. But the child gets to make decisions about where they go and what they play with and how and for how long.
Yeah. Play-based. We believe that's what every good preschool should be doing, because that's how children learn. They learn through play, and they learn through their senses. They're concrete learners. They take things in, they build on what they know, and expand it. And a creative teacher can vary the kinds of play by bringing out different activities at different times, depending on the children in the classroom. Yeah. I mean, there were times that we wanted to help a child through separation, and we would get a special car activity out.
Yeah. But there's all, you can teach anything through the vehicle of play. I
Right.
mean, if you're trying to teach numeracy, you can.
One of the other advantages of play is if you have a child that you're really working to encourage their socializing, that you can use a favorite activity.
Yeah.
It can be cars. It can be pushing babies around. We've had kids that go outside and just run around in circles.
It
but
could be packing for a trip.
Exactly.
All children seem to like to take a backpack and put as many toys as they possibly can into the backpack.
Exactly.
And then take it somewhere else.
Exactly. So it's a really good way of
And then
the
you
beginning
can bring
steps.
in lots of other kids. And it's a way of facilitating relationships between children, because they all want to play the same thing with you.
Right. To the older kids, you can use play, whether it's block building a specific structure, or it's even playing a board game together. They are still playing, but it's an opportunity for social interaction.
Formal academic curriculum is probably something that most of you are familiar with, but it places at the forefront the acquisition of cognitive skills, usually for preschool age, early numeracy and
Right.
early phonics.
Right. I think from our point of view, you run the risk of giving a group of kids an expectation that they are not ready for.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about developmental.
Right. Right.
And along with that goes the fact that all kids are not ready for the same things at the same time.
Yeah.
If you introduce academic skills that a child is not yet ready to acquire, you run the risk of making school seem a very unappealing place.
Right.
Making the child
Burning the kids out of
inadequate,
4 or 5. Yeah.
This is something I can't do.
Right. Right. Exactly. The opposite of what we're trying to do at school, which is to make kids willing to take risk,
Excited to learn things,
exactly,
which they naturally are.
Yeah. And you know what? I don't think studies have shown that earlier is necessarily better. The children who go off to kindergarten coming from more academic schools are caught up by kids coming from more play-based schools within a year or two. And maybe their excitement about learning has been dampened a bit because of that. So very often they're doing worksheets. There doesn't seem to me to be a lot of creativity in schools that emphasize academics at a young age.
Bank Street is dynamic, experiential. It's about learning by doing. It's very group oriented. It's often very messy. It is center based.
Has an integrative curriculum, which means that a lot of the activities might focus on a similar theme. So whether that be artwork and a story and even music will tie together.
Yeah, it could be tied together for that day.
Yeah.
Or it could be, the whole year.
Yeah, yeah. In an elementary school, they do more in-depth study of specific themes that are just part of their year study. How would you as a parent choose a preschool that would meet your child's needs? And I think you have to take into account a little bit of who your child is.
Sometimes too many choices. A school that is very child directed can be overwhelming to certain kids.
If you have a child that needs to move around a lot, you are going to want a school, one that has a fair amount of outside time, and most schools are required to have a balance of inside-outside time. But even in the classroom, I wouldn't think that child would do well in an overly structured program where the majority of the day is spent in sedentary activities.
Yeah, and even during group time, like we had structured group time, but I think we were understanding of the fact that certain kids need to move around even when you're doing a group time. If it's a school where children are expected to sit still, that might not work for a lot of kids.
Yeah. In addition to evaluating what you think your child or children either need or would be successful with, I think parents need to give some thought to their own preferences. I was going to say bias, but
It's the same thing.
It is, okay. We have had parents either who've gone on tour or even parents who've been at our school and are then looking for an elementary school for their child, where the two parents have different histories and expectations of what they think would be a good school for their child. I think a kind of in-depth discussion between the parent and the director, or some schools have admission directors, about what your child's needs are, and to get more information. We always invited the child to come with their parent for a visit, so the parent could assess through viewing the child in the facility what they thought, but also so we can determine
It was a good fit.
whether it was a good fit. Now, we always kept in mind that the likelihood was, or the distinct possibility was, that the child was going to struggle during a visit to a new school. Very often, neurodiverse kids are uncomfortable
With newness,
with
change.
Exactly. So we knew that going in, but it was good for the parent to actually see how our day flowed,
And to see how we would respond.
That's right.
If their
Exactly.
child had that response.
Exactly. It made a few parents very nervous when their child kind of melted down, but it was good to see.
I would say for parents, it's really a topic you need to bring up right away.
Right.
And one of the first things you need to ask,
Yeah.
either on a tour or even before the tour,
Yeah.
is,
Yeah.
this is what's going on with my kid.
Right.
Do you think that you can accommodate
Yeah.
them?
I agree.
And if they say no, or they say yes in a less than enthusiastic way, then you know to cross that one off your list.
Yeah. I agree. It's deflating to a parent to come on a tour and get a very lukewarm response. Most parents are not comfortable sharing at a tour.
No, I would really call or email
Before,
in
I
advance,
agree.
because there's no use in coming and seeing a school and falling in love with it,
Yeah.
and then hearing disappointing news about how they would respond to your child.
I've had a couple parents who didn't share.
Yes, because they're worried that their child won't be accepted.
That's right. Exactly.
But you don't want your child to be in the kind of
Exactly.
school that wouldn't accept them.
Yeah. You didn't want schools to make judgments where, in fact, the knowledge is important for both the school and for the parent in making a decision.
Yeah. And then, once you decide on a school, I think it's important to meet with the director and your child's teachers in advance of the school year, and really come up with a game plan together.
Yeah.
For those wondering what questions you can ask of a school when you're on your search, some simple questions might be, what is the teacher-child ratio? Does my child need to be potty trained? What are other simple? What are the hours?
Right.
That's a very, very important one.
Yeah, absolutely. What about, where do most of the kids here
Matriculate?
need to?
Where do they?
Yeah.
What elementary schools?
What
do they go
elementary
to?
school? Do they go public? Do they go private? Do they go in the area? Yeah.
And then there are a set of more complex questions to either ask of yourself or to ask the school, like, does this school share my set of values? Does the community share my set of values? Is this someplace that I'd feel comfortable going to on a daily basis? How do they approach conflict resolution? Do the teachers and administrators seem to love children and delight in being there and being around children?
Yeah. I think that through your tour, and hopefully most schools will take you on a walkthrough, you can get a feeling. It might be a gut level feeling, instinctual feeling of how the school, what's the overall feeling at the school? Do the kids look happy? Are they?
Yeah, these are questions to ask yourself when you're on the tour.
Exactly. You can trust your instinct and see what it feels like. I mean, for me, a certain amount of flexibility on the part of the director in terms of what their rules were of their community reflects a little bit of
Yes. Do they make you sign a paper saying that your child will not watch TV?
Yeah, right,
or,
exactly.
Or have any screen time?
Right.
Are you comfortable with that?
Don't get pulled in to a school that has rules that you're not comfortable with. It won't be a good fit. Won't be a good fit for you. Won't be a good fit for your child. Some schools have requirements of parents in terms of volunteer hours.
Yeah, that's important to know.
Exactly. And so that might be a question that you ask, not only in terms of volunteer hours, but what kind of parent involvement does the school have? Are there all school activities, and what are they, and is it something that
are there community building activities?
Exactly. Yeah. I think that the school and home need to work together. We've had a number of parents who think that miraculously a school can change who their child is. And yet you see,
my child doesn't listen.
That's right.
So I'm going to send them to school.
That's exactly
so
right.
To listen.
That's exactly right. And so certainly a school has a major impact on how successful your child will be. If you have a child that's self-regulated and generally can follow directions and work independently, they are going to be successful in their next endeavor into kindergarten. If you have a child who's a little bit more high-spirited, a little bit more active, and you don't have the wherewithal to kind of work on that at home, there might be some moments that will give you some cause for concern when you get feedback from a teacher. So if it is totally age appropriate for kids, especially at 4, the year before kindergarten, to go through a phase of poor listening and some oppositional behavior. That's
to be expected.
Exactly.
And it's a good thing.
It is.
I mean, it doesn't feel like a good thing. But it's a good thing.
It is a good thing. You have, raised a kid who can speak for themselves.
It's your job to set up the boundaries and their job to push them.
Exactly. But I would want to check with the teachers how your child is doing in school. And if there is a problem with them listening, outrightly flaunting teacher's instructions, then it's time for you and the teacher to come together with a game plan. But you're going to need to work on it at home as well as school, because teachers are not magicians, and Some kids are much more difficult in this respect. It isn't necessarily that the parent is failing to do something.
And good teachers should be understanding of that fact.
Right, exactly.
And if you're in an environment where teachers are upset or flummoxed because a child is acting like a child, then that might be a problem with the school.
Yeah. And I just think that's something to be looked at and possibly consulting with an outside person. But again, I think that this is an area that there should be a homeschool.
Meeting of minds.
Exactly. Meeting of minds is a perfect way of saying it. Yeah.